Dear rabbit hole dwellers, welcome back to yet another week of Rabbit Hole Stories. Today we had Roberto on the show. He gave us an insight into his rabbit hole story. He's the co-founder of Yzer and developer in the space as well. And he gave us a little bit of spiel about education within Bitcoin and what it's like to work in the Bitcoin space when it comes to blockchains and that kind of side of things. So, Joel, what did you take away from it, bro?
I think the number one thing I took away is that, we all have to make ends meet or trying to find ways to earn a bit of a living and to then stack in sats. And yeah, he explained like they did work on a couple of blockchain projects, but this paid the bills. This allowed them to then get started with Yzer. So it was a very healthy conversation there to see also the difference between blockchain like Polygon, Ethereum, Solana shit and compared to Bitcoin. So good episode, and I think without rushing, people should be able to listen in now. So guys, as always, stay curious and have fun with this one. Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode with Rabbit Hole Stories. And today we have Renato Schär on. You're one of the founders from SayNode. How has your day been so far, Renato?
It has been exciting. Talk to some potential clients and to the devs, obviously. Good day so far.
I'm curious, are you a dev as well, or more on the client side, management side?
I used to be a dev, not a good one, but I used to be one. I had 3 jobs as a dev, but since then I just saw that it's more valuable for me to communicate with devs, bring the needs of the clients to the devs in a way that is functional to them, because oftentimes this translation between client and developer can prove tricky. And that's mainly what I do now.
You often see these kind of memes online about the developer and client relationships, right? About
Exactly.
the developer having these meltdowns about their clients sort of demanding changes all the time. Have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah, demanding changes, or even worse, not even knowing exactly what they want in the first place. And then you have to make a guess, go back to them, then they want to change, which is nice. It's just part of the process. But as a dev, you don't really have the nerve to try to guess what people want. So having someone in between that breaks down the features that might be interesting and make sure that everything is structured in a way that makes sense also to code later on. That's something that's needed.
Great. It's nice to get a reflection back that those sort of memes are reality. But Renato, welcome to Rabbit Hole Stories. Thank you for sacrificing your finite time to delve into this episode with us. And the premise of the show is your rabbit hole story and how you discover Bitcoin, what you're doing in the space now. So I think that's a good starting point for all of us here. So why don't you just give us an introduction into your Bitcoin journey, sir?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a pretty usual journey in the sense that it starts with regret. So back in 2012, I came across Bitcoin the first time. I was interested enough in it, funnily enough, to look into it and try to understand it. I got relatively quickly that it can serve as an international settlement payment asset, but I still dismissed it. And then a couple months later, I even made a comment on Reddit early on, recommending it to someone else, but didn't bought any because I was interested in the technology, but didn't make the additional step to buy it. And that's where the regret that later funneled into action to learn about it came from. Then in 2017, I started my deep dive, made the detour through the altcoin territory, and in the last 4 years really become more and more serious about Bitcoin as the one asset that holds the most promise also in terms of a financial revolution and not just some technology.
So you are actually like the meme guy. I'm in it for the technology. You're not like if you post that meme. That is actually you.
I would say I got in for the technology, but I stayed for the monetary policy in a way. So the technology is also what's the reason why a lot of people do the altcoin detour first, because it seems like there's a lot happening, a lot of innovation in the system. That's to judge in the end by the market if there's enough value in these innovations to sustain them. But over the long run, I think people see altcoins as a let's call it a gateway drug to understand Bitcoin more deeply. And because of that, I'm more of the opinion that it should be like a Darwinian like cycle. Over time, the strongest asset will survive, and freedom to shitcoin, basically, if you want to call it like that. Let's have this ecosystem evolve, sure, but I'm of the pretty strong opinion that over the time it will all consolidate into Bitcoin, or most at least.
Before you mentioned that it's a kind of like a Darwinian process, so I already had a question lined up in mind, and that is it necessary for people to go through that regret stage like you did, or go through some kind of pain in order to understand the value of Bitcoin? Do you think that's a necessary hurdle in everyone's journey, or do you think some people can just sort of get it straight away without having the difficult journey? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I hope that they don't have to take the difficult path, but just from the conversations I've had so far with people in the space, it turned out that for most people I talked to, there is some considerable amount of regret, either by missing it or by losing it in stupid ways and having to learn a couple of things involved in the whole learning journey, which is one of the reasons why we started to build Yzer, because we start to get the same questions over and over again as Bitcoiners after some time, mostly when the price is going up. And so it's also in a way self-serving, that now I can just point people there and say, hey, if you want to learn more, that's the way to do the deep dive. And the hope is that errors can be avoided in the first place by education. But I see that education doesn't scale as well, because there are just a lot of people that don't want to invest the time and don't want to get it. But at least we can make the transition easier and offer an alternative to long-form content. That was the main idea behind Yzer.
Yeah, and I think it's working great. If you actually use the app, we obviously had Sanjna on, and she explained very deeply what the motivations and sort of the aspiring concepts were behind the app. And if you do use it, you download it. I also gave it to a few friends. It's not really Bitcoin only. It's also the whole financial literacy thing. And, the people need to understand first why you actually need Bitcoin, right? This is sort of, in my day job, 99% of the stuff I need to think about, like, okay, how can we approach it as simple as possible before they actually get into, I don't know, what's custody, self-custody, why do we need Bitcoin, why is it hard capped, all of these things. So I think it's a well and all-around service there. And you've mentioned you guys are developing the app, you're building the app, you work for SayNode as a founder. What is SayNode all about? What are the reasonings behind what you guys do? Or can you maybe give us let's do like a 5-minute pitch as if we were investors and we would look at the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So the central thesis of SayNode is that if we want to get Bitcoin adoption, the majority of the population will adopt Bitcoin through mobile apps. That's basically the one thing. And what we do at SayNode is we build intuitive mobile apps with Bitcoin integration. So that's basically the pitch. If we think that Bitcoin will be, we will reach the goal of hyper-Bitcoinization, we believe that most people will not do that by using a hardware wallet or a desktop wallet, but they will use mobile, the tool that they use every day anyways. And if we can create mobile apps with intuitive UI, UX that follow the design patterns that they already know, then this is that's the goal that SayNode has. And also applying Bitcoin across different domains, because in my view, Bitcoin is the ultimate tool to align incentives, human incentives overall, and this can be applied over different domains. For example, in Yzer, we align the incentives of the user to stay focused on learning and educating themselves by giving them small rewards in Bitcoin, in loot chests, where they can, in loot boxes, in order to overcome the usual drive to distract themselves. And in that way, Bitcoin, and also in the macroeconomic sense, the hope is that it aligns the incentives of people all over. And SayNode wants to build the apps that the users will ultimately use.
You've got a challenge on your hands, I think, because, in the sense that most people everywhere now, particularly in the West, are constantly glued to their screens, right? They're on their mobile phones all the time, and there's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of things that they can just sort of like get their dopamine fix on the apps and things like that. So I suppose your challenge, I think, is retention, keeping people's attention on the apps. And other than the incentives built into the earning sats when you're sort of doing this gamified learning, how challenging is it to sort of keep people on your app and educate themselves in Bitcoin?
You're right. That is the big challenge of app design overall and app development. But in a way, it's also helpful because we already see the solutions to this problem because other apps do it pretty well. You have the gamification elements. You have to capture their attention. You have to make intuitive UIs that don't even allow the people to drop off by making it as simple as possible. So by using the same mechanisms that the big players and big tech use to capture your attention, by just employing the same mechanisms, but using it for something that benefits the user. The idea, of course, is that there's still some semblance of intrinsic motivation inside of the people, that they will choose the alternative that at least rewards them with some Bitcoin that they've heard about, even if they're just curious about it, over the alternative that just gathers their data and sells it. So that's one aspect of what we're trying to do. And I think in the Bitcoin community, there is a bit of a consensus on this by now. A couple of years ago, it was still more based on we need the techies that build incredible protocols and very sophisticated schemes and how to manage your Bitcoin, like building Bitcoin solutions for Bitcoiners. But we are strongly of the belief that we need to build solutions for no-coiners that are simple enough that they want to use Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's a bit of a trope because everybody wants to do that. But I think I read it on Nostr recently that Bitcoin has a lot of technical talent. What's sometimes lacking in the Bitcoin apps that we have is design talent, UI, UX, people that are mindful of the UI, UX, and just marketing and sales as well, because these are the areas that more traditional Bitcoins shy away from more naturally. Not to paint a too generalistic picture, but usually that's with the products we have right now the case.
100%. And if you actually look at the way, if some money is distributed into the Bitcoin system, and we can talk about this later, a lot of it goes actually into like the hardcore development stuff. You know, I don't know, we want different layer solutions, different address formats, different functionality things, but very, very little money actually goes into design. But it's a shift, like you said. I mean, even when you spoke before about hardware or computer wallets, you now see stuff, for example, like BitKey. I don't know if you want to call it a hardware wallet. For me, it looks more like an AirTag by Block, but it is a Bitcoin wallet essentially, and it has the functionality of, you know, a sort of tap and go thing, if you like, where normal people can interact with their phone with it. And then, yeah, it's up to us to actually do good designs and think of ways to, you know, tell them like, hey, if you need to enter your seed phrase, make sure it's like as much offline as possible. We've had previous guests who actually explained like you can't really do 100% air gapped anyway, and like air gapped is a different way of measuring. Is it really offline or is it just air gapped from from ClearNet, from like the regular internet? And yeah, all of these things. I think the more you can build these things into it, the better. But I want to quickly shift to what I mentioned. You guys obviously you develop with the goal of getting more people into Bitcoin, but I guess it's a hard road to get there because. Again, if there's one thing that we really lack in the ecosystem, it's that big influx of money you probably usually see in like blockchain businesses, Web3, crypto, whatever you want to call it. How's that for you? Do you take on gigs to get more into Bitcoin, or what is sort of the path there?
Yeah, so the road we've chosen with SayNode is that we have a base layer of project-based mandate work that we do for clients in order to have a solid foundation to stand on and also pay out the salaries to our devs. And then on top of that, with all the overcapacity we have, we try to pursue our own products. And through that, we, in a way, subsidize the own products at first until we find the right product market fit and can scale them up, hopefully, to reach more and more people. So this is the way we've chosen to subsidize this. There's different approaches. The Bitcoin VC landscape is also quickly changing, but it just with current market conditions, it's of course a bit rough with the high interest environment to raise additional capital. But we are fortunate enough there that we have some clients that trust us, that trust the work that we do, and that made it possible for us to sustain ourselves and focus on improving and building more apps that hopefully will reach a more broad audience over time.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I think because for me, I'm very focused on the Bitcoin ecosystem, and I went through the whole kind of altcoin phase, like most people did as well. And at the time, I was kind of sort of trying to catch up on all the sort of progress and the developments and this and that and the other that was going on in all these different spaces and their use cases and things like that. Is it pretty much the same out there as it always has been? Because it's just a marketing. For me, a lot of the altcoins are just like a marketing tool, and they're trying to sell you something. What actual real developments are happening out there, if any? Because you seem to have your finger on that pulse more than probably I do.
Yeah, somewhat. I'm trying to shift the strategic orientation of SayNode more and more towards Bitcoin as much as possible. But there are still developments happening, and I think we shouldn't dismiss it outright, because I think some of these things will lead to innovation happening on different Bitcoin layers. For example, one thing I'm quite excited about is Rootstock as a sidechain of Bitcoin that's EVM compatible, not because I particularly like the Ethereum virtual machine, but because it allows us to tap into the huge developer base that Ethereum has, while still being on Bitcoin and being able to move up to the base chain. So that's something I'm quite excited about. We participated in the hackathon of Rootstock during the summer, and yeah, for example, that's one thing I'm quite excited about, because in my view, over the long term, things will consolidate more and more onto Bitcoin rather than different altcoins. And I see Rootstock as a nice way to ease the transition, and while still benefiting from the work that has been done on the other blockchains, and apply this in a way that can benefit Bitcoin, not on the base chain, obviously, but applications downstream on the different additional layers. So on Rootstock, I'm planning to do more work in the future, and Lightning, obviously, we use in Yzer, and haven't done too much work on Liquid, but it's also a quite interesting opportunity we see there. It's just really about finding out where's the market, how can we monetize on these products. For example, with Yzer, so far we've mostly monetized on the educational aspect of the app, with people subscribing, pledging, which also allows us to keep the content free for all the users that do not want to subscribe and do the pledge. But finding business models that work with Bitcoin is somewhat tricky. And also the startup ecosystem in Bitcoin, I think one of the reasons why it's not such a vivid VC landscape like in altcoins, for example, is because we do have this great alternative of Bitcoin itself. So you need to convince everyone to invest in your startup because you need to outperform Bitcoin rather than just holding Bitcoin. So the whole time preference thing and resetting the baseline of expectations for returns makes it much harder, I think, to succeed as a Bitcoin startup than benefiting from the VC money in other chains, I think. So yeah, having this alternative asset, Bitcoin, instead of investing into a Bitcoin startup, really, I think, recalibrates the risk tolerance for a lot of the liquidity providers. So that means that you really have to find a problem that you solve, provide a solution that works in order to have a business model that is sustainable over the long run. And that's a challenge, of course, but the central belief that adoption will move more to mobile, I think, is enough for us to find interesting apps that we can build.
Yes, and I think what we, as a Bitcoin community, sometimes also forget is we do want to approach the, mom and pops, the people who, I don't know, they maybe have some gold, they maybe have some stocks, and they go like, I lost some money on that stock. I maybe broke even after like 2-3 years, or I completely overdid it with X, Y, and Z. And let's just get into some Bitcoin. And they're not going to read. First of all, they're not going to read the white paper, although it would be cool. They're not gonna go out there onto Bitcoin Twitter. They just go into the App Store. They look for Bitcoin Wallet, these things. They maybe look for it on Google and try to come up with some stuff. So the simpler I think the transition from I want to invest some money into it is, the easier the adoption will be. And this maybe also goes into these things like custody, self-custody. Obviously, working at a self-custody company, we highly encourage people to end up there, but we also know it is a journey for most people. So, immediately writing down these words, just like blasting them as the first screen in your app, is probably not the best idea. But having a smooth onboarding in these things, this is probably what will help in the next few waves. Because, think about all the ETF investors who now look at the ETF and go like, oh, I can invest into Bitcoin. Then you go like, no, you actually don't. But it's a start to get you there, and to maybe make that transition a bit easier. Anything to add from your end there?
Yeah,
also with the whole ETF situation?
That goes back to the thing we discussed before, that do people have to get burned in order to get it? Maybe yes. So maybe some people have to go into the ETF first, and then maybe one of them needs to go bust in order to take the next step on this journey. So I think it's a step-by-step process, and the smoother we can create the transition by trying to assist with education and user-friendly products, the better. But we can't avoid that people will burn themselves, I think. And also regarding the going step by step with the user and not throwing too much at them at the beginning, I also think that's crucial. For example, one of the things that we want to do at Yzer, and that's on our roadmap, is that as you level through the app, we unlock different areas of the app. Maybe we prompt you at level 3. Yeah, maybe now is a good time to think about self-custody. Maybe now you should withdraw your sats from the Yzer app itself, and just go as the user progresses and offer the things that will be relevant to them at that point.
Yeah, I suppose what Wise is doing is providing an opportunity for people to circumvent that pain, right? It's kind of coaxing them into educating themselves in a fun way, and they can earn sats while they're doing it. And the whole ETF route, I suppose, there's going to be a route that people are going to take, maybe a shortcut or a wrong turn, where it's education in itself by making that mistake, right? And then you have to sort of learn from your mistakes. So I suppose there's going to be always a wave of people that are going to have to suffer in some way before they can really understand the value that Bitcoin has for them and everyone else. I wanted to ask you, because you're kind of probably the guy to ask with the SayNode and blockchain development that you do. Could you explain for maybe those people that don't know, or maybe just explain it as you see it? What is a blockchain, and how is it different? How's Bitcoin different from any other?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's also a part of the learning process, I think, to see this crucial distinction. The way I see it, a blockchain in and of itself is just a data structure. This data structure allows you to do some stuff that you couldn't otherwise do. Bitcoin itself pioneered the blockchain, if we want to call it. There's this big discussion in the white paper. They call it time chain, and Satoshi only mentioned it in the forum. He only replied once to a thread calling it blockchain. So whether you want to use it interchangeably is a matter of debate. But if you have a blockchain, it allows you to use this data structure to reduce trust in a system. If we simplify it out, that there's differences between consensus algorithms, who is able to write to create the blocks, all of these things. But sadly, blockchain has just become a buzzword for multiple companies and also altcoins to just praise things that they could potentially do. And the main use case for a blockchain is Bitcoin. It is one part that makes Bitcoin work. And the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain, the way I would put it, is that Bitcoin combines a lot of very interesting concepts, one of them being the blockchain, in order to create an alternative monetary system. Whereas the blockchains, they try out different stuff. Like there's the lab of how could we set it up differently? What if we don't have a supply cap? What if we don't use proof of work? There you can see a lot of variation in the altcoin market. But the one that stood the test of time undoubtedly is Bitcoin. So that's the difference I would make. Bitcoin is truly decentralized, is truly permissionless, it's truly censorship resistant, whereas many of these other chains are not. They might have some other trade-offs and advantages even in some cases, but the way I see it, these advantages do not compensate for the lacks they have in other regards. And these advantages that other chains might have can be replicated on separate layers of Bitcoin. So the way I would like to see scaling is not through different chains, but through different layers that offer these advantages that other chains do have. But the thing is, because Bitcoin is the first asset to truly invent or discover digital scarcity, it's the one that has the biggest mind share, the biggest network effects, that has the right conditions, the right parameters. And I'm still amazed at how Satoshi got all of this right from the get-go. Not from the get-go, but pretty much from the get-go. And because Bitcoin has this big mind share, market cap, it's the one that will aggregate all the value over time. And I think these altcoins are interesting experiments in what you can do, and they offer some innovation. But because this can be replicated in separate layers, like we see with Rootstock, that's EVM compatible and allows for Turing-complete smart contracts. Because of that, I think most value will accrue into Bitcoin rather than altcoins. Was that an answer to the question? I rambled for quite a bit.
No, perfect. I can't remember which core developer it was, but someone once said, altcoins are the test net for Bitcoin, and this is sort of how I look at it. Doesn't mean that everything we do in Bitcoin is great. Like you said, we actually sacrifice a lot of, I think, that first movers advantage stuff like Ethereum has with its layers and all of its Web3 decentralized stuff. Where this is the things that VCs want to see, connect one button, access to a huge ecosystem or liquidity or whatever you want to call it. And it's also, frankly, what's easier for most normies, because it's more lucrative to, buy an ape that then gains in value and then you sell, but you can somehow still have it in a decentralized manner, which just means you have access to a wallet with a private key. Rather than actually, taking the time, holding Bitcoin, not doing much with it, it's just sitting there. So I think that's a good contrast between the things. But speaking of NFTs, even with Bitcoin now and this weird ordinal theory and whatever's been going on there, you do see, in terms of actually involving stuff on the main chain, things that can work somehow. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm definitely not encouraging it. But you obviously have the scaling solutions. Are you guys particularly focusing on one Bitcoin scaling solution? If clients come up to you, for example, you say we only do Lightning or only do Liquid, or are you more generalized, open to accepting everything? You spoke about Rootstock before as well. I don't know, maybe you guys are some sidechain maxis or something, or doesn't it matter and you just basically want to help out?
Yeah. So I love the thing about altcoins being the testnet of Bitcoin. I'm going to steal that in future conversations. And about what solution we provide. First of all, I look at SayNode as a customer-centric business. So whatever the customer wants, as long as it aligns broadly with our values, we're going to provide it. We, of course, have the best interest of our customer in mind. So we will always advise him or her to use Bitcoin, because exactly, I really do believe that over the long run, it's the thing that's going to stay. But if they really want to build on something else, that's their decision. We are here to build the solution they want. And in terms of which layer we build on, there as well, I'd like to think of ourselves as not chain agnostic, but implementation agnostic. Whatever does the best job for the client in its situation, that's what we're going to focus on. Of course, this is influenced by the people that are working for us, the tech stack that we have. We're trying to evolve and stay up to date, but right now it's still a bit dictated by that. And as I said, I think some of these thoughts are in a way secondary, because what's lacking is not so much the foundational layer, the infrastructure layer, I believe, to build great products, but really the interface, the user experience, having it nicely done on a mobile app that still brings the benefits of these different layers to the user, while not forcing them to understand what's going on under the hood. I think that's the much more relevant part for mass adoption than which sidechain you use exactly. As long as it works for the user and it provides the benefits that Bitcoin does, it's a good solution. Of course, you have to always keep in mind the different trade-offs. There's trade-off between security and user experience. There's so many different trade-offs, but in general, as long as you provide a good solution, that's more important than which exact way of delivering it you choose.
Yeah, it's got me thinking about solutions and things, and obviously Bitcoin on its core layer, the layer 1 and things like that, it serves a purpose, but it allows us to sort of develop new ideas upon it and sort of like test it and sort of develop our needs upon it. But do you see any solutions that we need and don't yet have in Bitcoin? And if so, what are those solutions?
Yeah, that's a good question, because if I were 100% sure about it, then of course I would try to build it and get it out as quickly as possible. But what I do see as a lack is, one thing that can be an issue is, but it's being worked on with Lightning, that you have to be constantly online in order to monitor it. Of course, you can use watchtowers to mitigate this somewhat, and with Bolt 12, there's stuff going on. So that's one thing that we need to do, and then just the way I see it is really that the mobile experience needs to be smooth. It can't be that you have to, at the beginning, like you mentioned before at the beginning, Joel, that you are prompted at the beginning to do everything. You should do a step-by-step process that only prompt the user to log in, for example, once it's needed to log in, only prompt them to take the next steps in terms of self-custody when it makes sense for them to do so, so as not to break the flow of the user, things like that. And maybe to circle back to the previous question as well about trade-offs, another reason why I think most of the things that are being built will consolidate on Bitcoin is just because as long as Bitcoin remains the leader in decentralization and security, and I don't see a way that is changing, it's inevitable that the other trade-offs can be neglected, because as long as these two factors are still present, it's a feature and not a bug that Bitcoin is changing slowly. It's intended that there's not experimentation going on. If you want to build on a solid foundation in order to progress, because otherwise you couldn't trust the layer. And I'm much rather doing some crazy application that requires some additional capabilities on something like rootstock or Lightning than trying to get something new into the Bitcoin core protocol, which also ties back to the ordinals comment. I'm not sure whether we should look at it as a bug or a feature, but in the end, they're valid transactions right now. Might be that they're patched out later on. Miners like them, so there's so many considerations to make, and I'm really out of my depth, honestly, to judge this. I trust the core developers there, but I think most of the experimentation should happen at the lower levels and not, or higher levels, layer twos, rather than Bitcoin itself.
I don't know. Sometimes for me, it's also hard if we say these things like, Bitcoin is censorship resistant, for example, a very good statement to make. Wouldn't censorship resistant also mean that crap can happen on it and it still survives? In fact, even if crap happens, it makes the whole thing stronger. At least that's my perception of, how we should go about these things. And then at the same time, like I've been long enough into Bitcoin, you could say the whole digital asset ecosystem, because, I remember a time when it was like, block size wars, we're now going to either increase the block size. Then very quickly stuff came out like, banks can integrate and like data sets can come in. Obviously never happened. There were some experimentations on there. Fees spiked, people got upset, new all-time high, dropped again. Everyone evaporated, back to normal. Sort of the core development took place and things improved. So I think I have more trust into the ecosystem at the moment that there will be solutions around these things. And yeah, it teaches you stuff like proper UTXO management, for example, or you then have to look into scaling. So I think there's always an outlet, but obviously it is frustrating if like your main business model, for example, is dependent on, the Bitcoin on-chain fees being low, or a certain usability without actually spamming a network, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's just trends and these ebb and flows, and things will chill out a bit again. We've seen the last couple of months, so I think it's just a matter of time until everyone is down from the hype, and everyone is a bit smoother on Bitcoin Twitter, which I know is hard to believe, but not as crazy as it is sometimes.
Yeah, and if you say your business model is dependent on fees being low, there's two ways to look at this. You can look at this and say, okay, we need to change something on the layer, or you can look at it and say, yeah, your business model is wrong. In that case, the situation changed. You need to adapt. That's easier said than done, obviously, and it's harsh reality, but it's similar to the market in general. You don't change the market response to your offering. You just have to adapt to the market and deal with it, basically. And with Bitcoin, I think it's similar. You just have to you have to deal with what it throws at you, and it's quite amazing that so far this has dynamically regulated itself in a way that as fees spike, people talk more about scaling solutions. As they're low, they're making more use of it. It's the incentives are so amazingly aligned that that it's really something to think about. It's such a nice self-regulating system and so well thought through that it's quite nice to watch. And I'm interested to see how it will develop in the next coming years, because it might be that we're now in a phase that really changes everything. Because people have been talking about institutions coming in for a while, but now it might actually happen with the ETF. And also just in terms of the rewards, now we're slowly getting to a place where fees, I mean, that's also a discussion to leave, that fees do have to spike if we want to still incentivize miners, or the price has to rise, or a combination of both. So it's so, in a way, it's still very young. Bitcoin is old, and if it comes to track record of security and decentralization and some trends that you can observe, but in the grand scheme of things, there's still a lot that needs to happen and that will happen, and it will be very interesting to see how it plays out. Sometimes you forget in the bubble that how much of a bubble it still is. Usually when you then talk to your family or something like that, then you realize that, okay, there's still a lot of work to be done until this is mainstream. And we'll see. And the narrative will change over time, and also culturally this will be a challenge, because probably the people that have been in Bitcoin longer than I am will listen to this and think, yeah, he has no clue what he's talking about. These were the core values earlier on. And we probably have to grapple with that in maybe 7-8 years time frame, that the big influencers talking about Bitcoin will not be the same crowd that we have right now, and they will also attract other people and maybe not understand the core principles we try to live by in the same way we do now. But I think that's just the challenge of adoption. And so far, it, again, quite amazing that it has gone so smooth and that the adoption rate is somehow manageable. If it was much quicker, it would be much more of a challenge to get people on board and have some consensus about what this thing is and what we can do with it. And if it was much slower, then it might have faded out already. So that we have this rate that we have right now, and it seems to work out quite nicely. That's, yeah, it's great to see. And also, what's also interesting there is that there's different things that Bitcoin is, and everybody thinks they know what it is, but what it is changes over time as well. Like it is an asset as well as a transaction network, as well as a maybe in a couple of months or even now, if you look at it in microgrids, a cornerstone of the electricity system, and who knows what it will evolve to over time as well. For example, there are some, there's some use cases that might not even reveal themselves until we have a broader adoption. For example, with Yzer, we're doing the education, but where else might these micro rewards on Lightning be useful? We are experimenting, and we were working with the Swiss Innovation Agency to do a pre-study on an application in the health sector. Diabetes patients, in the first days of their treatment, they need to learn a lot about the disease, about their body, about how to manage it. And there as well, maybe this is an arduous process because you have to learn stuff that you don't necessarily are intrinsically motivated to learn. And if we can sprinkle in micro rewards there, for example, it might lead to actual better health outcomes rather than reading some dusty book on the disease. And maybe that's the kind of extra incentivation, extra motivation that you need in order to take that stuff seriously. And that's just one thing we're experimenting with right now. And there's many, many domains where, as I said, Bitcoin serves as the ultimate tool to align human incentives. And sometimes that can even help with your own incentives, like the product that Michael Saylor talked about employees being on time and getting a small Lightning reward. There's so many things where money is in the equation right now, but there's no proper market to regulate it. Not regulated in that sense, but there's no proper incentivization scheme in place that if money is not a unit that has to have a certain minimal size because of transaction fees to be worth it to send around, like streaming money, then there's a whole sphere of opportunities that open up if you can really incentivize individual behaviors on a micro level and not receive your salary as a whole batch, but really dependent on individual actions. For example, I'm thinking way past what we are envisioning now, but who knows what the future will bring there.
You're tapping straight into my sort of deep rabbit hole that I go into constantly, and that is the human incentive side, because we don't really fully understand the potential and capabilities that Bitcoin can provide us, and we're kind of thinking in this fiat mindset, or we're thinking within a framework that exists today. So we don't quite yet understand what we're sort of developing and what our use cases might be in the future, what our incentives will be, what even is, a vendor, what does that look like? So we're stepping into the unknown, and it's quite difficult to develop upon the unknown, really, and we can just only sort of creep into it and test it as we go along. And that's what I forever find fascinating and sort of like thinking about all the time. But also, I'm very conscious that we're running towards the end of the show, and I think it might be a good idea to sort of go into our All Roads Lead into Bitcoin challenge, and I think that's something you're familiar with that we do on the show, because we're trying to prove the thesis that actually all roads do lead back to Bitcoin. And Joel and I have come up with the word FIRE, And we want to see if you can link that back to Bitcoin somehow, my friend.
Yeah, I can give it a shot. So fire represents a technological step change in human history. By funneling chemical energy for the first time, this allowed humans to cook their food, which allows for a smaller digestive tract, which allowed for more brain development and really kicked human development into the next gear. And just as fire has been a step change in human technology, I think Bitcoin is the next big thing that will really allow humans to unlock new energy sources through the mining incentives for one, and also through aligning these human incentives that kick humanity as a civilization into the next gear. And that's the analogy I would take there. And I would say Bitcoin is the one technology that was missing to get humanity to a full type 1 civilization. Is that close enough of a relationship leading back to Bitcoin? I don't know.
Well, yes. When you premised the answer to "I'll give it a go," I wasn't expecting something as brilliant as the answer that you provided. So yeah, that's a perfect answer. Well done. So thank you for that. And yet again, all roads lead back to Bitcoin so far. Anyway, it's been an honor and a pleasure speaking with you. I've learned a lot during this episode, and for people who want to reach out and maybe learn a bit more, where can they get in contact with you, and what sort of things should they look at?
Great. Yeah, sure. So if they want to learn more, first address, of course, is Yzer, our mobile app where you can learn more about financial education and Bitcoin. If they want to learn more about SayNode and the services we provide, also including mobile development in combination with Bitcoin, then the SayNode Twitter account is one address to look at, the SayNode website, saynode.ch, and also our LinkedIn page is where we post some updates as well. So these are the addresses to reach out to. Always happy to talk with people about this stuff. And if you have the great idea what is missing in the Bitcoin ecosystem, reach out to us. Maybe we could build it together.
That's brilliant. And if any of you guys missed that, please check out the show notes. All the details are there. And thank you, Renato, for your finite time. And I extend that thanks to our audience as well. In the meantime, everybody, we'll see you next week, and stay curious.